Let's go ahead and get started. So I want to welcome everyone to today's Lunch and Learn. We're joined by Jonas Worth here from the You Can Play project for an exciting session on how to create a more inclusive locker room culture. Before we start, I do want to give an introduction to our Lunch and Learn series. This series is intended to provide a space for Up2Us Sports and its partners, coaches, vistas, local community sports organizations, our staff, et cetera, to gather, to learn from each other, and to spotlight the amazing work that many of us are doing, and with the ultimate goal of creating a healthy environment and healthy programs for our youth to play and grow. And so I do want to emphasize that this is a casual space, but it is a safe and a brave space for all of us to share our experiences and our knowledge. Because no one knows everything, but together we know a lot. So we're happy and we're grateful that you're here to join us, and we welcome you. So a couple of Zoom protocol things. We'll have a big breakout session today. So we welcome your engagement, but we understand that many of us have other things going on potentially, and you may not be able to fully engage in a breakout room. So if you do want to elect out of the breakout room session, we'd like to ask you to rename your name and put an asterisk at the front of your name. And that way I know to when I'm sorting out the breakout rooms. Second, on the off chance that we get Zoom bombed or anything happens with the Zoom room, we will close the room immediately, and I'll send a new Zoom link to your email that you used to register for this session. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Jonas Worth today, who is the Director of Partnerships and Development at You Can Play, focused on creating LGBTQ and inclusion strategies with major sports leagues and developing curriculum in the area of coaching and allyship. Jonas joined You Can Play after a 15-year career in collegiate and semi-pro soccer coaching, where he used the same philosophies of creating inclusive spaces to develop team cohesion at every level. He holds a master's in coaching science, sports psychology from the University of British Columbia, as well as UEFA England, United Soccer Coaches Premier, and Canadian Soccer Association license for coaching soccer. So, Jonas, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I was amazed that we got through your whole introduction without anyone interrupting you. I'm very happy to be here, and for those who may or may not be considering why we're doing a breakout room, I will give you ample time to eat your lunch first, probably about 15 to 20 minutes, and the breakout rooms will be short and sweet. But what I really want to give everyone the opportunity to do is actually work through some genuine challenges that you may have in providing that inclusive environment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what You Can Play is and what You Can Play does, a little bit about our concepts today, but I really wanted to give you the opportunity to also discuss some of those situations. So that's really what the breakout rooms will be about. No problem if you don't want to participate, but we will get right into it. So I'm just going to do a bit of screen sharing here. Sorry, did I just mute myself by accident? Yeah, I think I did. Yeah. Anyway, I've been at You Can Play about a year and a half. Many of you will know You Can Play likely from our Pride games in various professional sports leagues. That's the most outward-facing thing that we do, but essentially we work with pro sports leagues as well as NCAA and other collegiate divisions to create inclusive environments and then have that model trickle down. And that's what is actually probably the most important effect of using professional sports people, because we don't live in a world where a lot of your ambassadors at the pro level are going to be able to deliver and speak 365 days a year about the importance of inclusion. However, we do want them to be ready to be good allies, let's say, or to just be providing that environment and that model for our younger players. So really, we are actually focusing a lot more on the coaching world and the area of coaching education, which is kind of where I come into play. For those of you who don't know, the Burke family and the legacy of Brendan Burke is why You Can Play was started. The Burke family is very famous in hockey, especially in the NHL ranks. And one of Brian Burke's sons, Brendan, decided to come out while he was a college player. And unfortunately, he had a tragic car accident, and his brother Patrick and a few friends decided to start this and start You Can Play to focus on what they could do better, so that the next person like Brendan to come out wouldn't have to face the same challenges as Brendan. And so they've been at it for about 10 years, first starting with the NHL and now branching out into pretty much every major sports organization you can think of, including the NCAA level. And so those are some of our partners. And we also work with corporate partners who are interested in making sports a little bit more inclusive. And so they sponsor a lot of the programs that we do, so that the true outreach can happen at the grassroots level, right? So we use all this programming and this fundraising at the major sports level so that we can really have an impact where it counts. And part of that is what you see there on the left with coaches, right? But what a lot of people don't know is that we're very interested in fan spaces as well. What we do and what is presented to the public has a huge focus, obviously, on those pro teams and those pride nights or maybe those pride events. But we are interested in safe spaces for the LGBTQ community in fan spaces too. And so we're actually working with a few leagues right now to develop intervention strategies that make more sense when you're attending a live game and you hear homophobic, sexist, racist sort of behavior from fans. And we also do a little bit of crisis intervention. And now our main focus, especially in light of this, COVID era, we're talking a lot more about coaching education and why that is so important. So just a little, example of why it's important to have an inclusive locker room. Whether someone on your team is a member of the LGBTQ community or not, you should always work with the knowledge that there probably is someone, or maybe someone who will be. And we already have so many challenges, as youth coaches, to getting the most out of our athletes, and the reason why we want to get the most out of our athletes is because you see the impact that it has on their confidence, on their self-esteem, and you see lower numbers of participation in LGBTQ youth, and the impact of that, it almost limits access unnecessarily, right? Everybody may have heard some of the great stories recently about like Yannick Duplessis, a professional hockey player at the junior level, coming out, and how positive it was, and all the positive response he got and all the support. Well, the majority of youth athletes who are at least unsure of their own identity actually tend to struggle with that. And unfortunately, Yannick's story is still the exception. So, we work in that space. We work in that space so that we can be proactive and create, the next generation of athletes who are ready to be supportive, who make really good allies when they do come out. And we try to be proactive, right? We don't want to get into a situation where we're going, I don't know what to do. One of my athletes just told me they're non-binary, and I don't know what that means. That being said, it's not expected that everyone on this call today, it has to be an expert in LGBTQ vocabulary, right? What we're doing is we're opening the door and we're starting the process for you. Or maybe you're a member of the LGBTQ community yourself, and you want to actually have those conversations with your athletes. no matter what, so that their locker room environment is that much more inclusive. And, inclusion in the locker room ultimately comes down to your coaching philosophy. It's a part of establishing and growing team cohesion. And the reason why that is because, let's be honest, we've all heard that old cliche like, oh, championship team, Tampa Bay Lightning lifted the Stanley Cup on Tuesday night. They talked about what a family environment it was. They all sat around the trophy. They broke tradition, right? That environment is actually what developing an inclusive locker room, including inclusive for those who might be from the LGBTQ community. That's what it's all about, because these values of inclusion are actually championship values. And getting to a point where your team is a closer knit group also means being inclusive of all considerations, not just, possible members from the LGBTQ community, but it comes down to social class, first language, right? Access to sport from a financial perspective. So this graphic actually is available on our website. You can playproject.org. You can go to the resources section. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, right? The most important thing to remember is that you have this consistent commitment to the locker room, and then when things happen, you're prepared to intervene. You're prepared to say, we don't use that language here. We accept everyone, making your position clear, and then go from there, because it's a learning process. It's not, like Wynn alluded to in the beginning, none of us are experts here, including myself, right? There's going to be a time, and I'm still coaching at the NCAA level. There's going to be a time where I'm faced with a situation I haven't been faced with before, and I have to figure out how that works. What you do ultimately behind the scenes when you're learning and developing your own inclusive approach to coaching is what really matters. So the beauty of Zoom is that it never responds to my slide situation. I thought it was important to discuss the concept of intersectionality just a little bit. I think it's a term that if you've taken a deep dive into the art of diversity and equity and inclusion, you've probably heard of it. But it's really important in the coaching environment, especially in certain sections of the United States where, you're going to have young people coming to your practice who may or may not be members of the LGBTQ community, may be considering that, but there are other aspects of their own identities which might limit their participation in sport, or be also contributing to that dissonance that they feel in terms of being a member of that locker room, right? So the beauty about establishing this inclusive locker room environment and let's say being a good ally is that it does apply to all these different areas, that intersection of different levels of discrimination that, a student athlete can face. And so, we talk about race, and we've been talking about race a lot more this year. And even the people who are the supposed experts, right, are even questioning their own approaches. You Can Play actually said, internally, are we doing a really good job of sharing the experience of the Black members of the LGBTQ community from a coaching perspective, from an athlete perspective? What about the indigenous coaches or athletes who experience that intersection of different levels of discrimination? And I think it's also important to talk about social class, because, access to sport is not guaranteed. And a lot of us, even myself, as someone who's been able to go far in the coaching world and travel all around the world and get coaching licenses here and there, that aspect of privilege is not available to a lot of my athletes, especially in the soccer world where, whether we're talking about a player who comes from abroad and can't earn as much scholarship, or talking about a player whose, parents may not speak English very well and whose first language is not English. All those things have to be considered when we are talking about establishing a more inclusive locker room. Words, yeah. I don't want to do a quick poll here, But I would bet that the majority of you have at one point in your life as an athlete, maybe even a casual athlete now, or in your locker rooms, despite how, woke our society is becoming, I bet a lot of you have heard the statement, oh, that's so gay. And teenagers use it all the time. And even when they get to me in their first year of university, they're still using statements like that. And they're saying, oh, well, I didn't mean it, right? I didn't mean it to be harmful, right? So that's where we have to have the conversation with our athletes about impact, right? Because a lot of people will say, well, I didn't intend for it to be meaningful. But explaining to them that, how powerful words can be and how important it is to think about impact is really important. And I wish that some of our leaders in politics would consider the impact of how words matter and what they mean when they say things. But anyway, um, and then if you yourself don't know any one of your players, if they're a member of the LGBTQ community, or you don't even know a single person, what we want to do is we want to imagine a world where, let's say, 2 out of 10 people in your locker room are, and we want to prepare you to be a good ally. And allyship itself has come under greater scrutiny this year. And what we talk about at You Can Play is that the art of being a good ally should apply to all underrepresented groups in sport, not just the LGBTQ community. And so what we have been, doing a deep dive with this year is making sure, like, see that expression down there, it's not about you. Well, being a good ally it is not about you, and making it not about your own frustrations and your own anger, and making it a little bit more student centered. And I will tell you that sometimes the art of being a good ally, if you work with, those who maybe have already self-identified as members of the LGBTQ community, a lot of times simple gestures and actions that don't really involve you can go a very long way. I coached an NCAA Division III team in the U.S. recently, and the the two people I selected as captain and co-captain both happened to be it was a women's team. They both happened to be lesbian women, and that gesture to them, as well as throwing a simple pride game, meant more to them in terms of like how I recognize where they were coming from than anything else. And it had nothing to do with me. They ran everything from there and took it from there. So we'll talk a little bit about allyship after we do some work in the breakout rooms. But I wanted to stop it there for now, and just now that we have a sort of an idea of what we're talking about today, and what I'd like people to do in the breakout rooms, and I'll have wins as send people off a little bit, is one, work through the question that you're presented with. I put out a whole bunch of different questions that I thought were relevant to coaches right now, to people who may or may not have any experience working with LGBTQ athletes. And what I'd like to do is for you to spend 7-8 minutes talking about the issue at hand, and then maybe have one person report back on your findings, and then have a bit of an open discussion about it. And since we have a mute button, it should be relatively civil. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Win to send us all out to breakout rooms. I'm probably going to go between a few different breakout rooms, and then we're going to come back in approximately 9 minutes. So not very long, just so we have enough to get through and have a bit of discussion afterwards, and we'll see how everyone does. So without further ado, we're going to take it away and send us away.
Yeah, thank you, Jonas. So I have everyone set up in breakout rooms. I am going to send a link in the chat right now for a Google Doc that we will all be using to take notes for our breakout room. So in that Google Doc, you'll see a bunch on each page is the different questions for each breakout room. If you want to go to your respective breakout room page and take notes on that page. Is there any questions before I move everyone into the rooms?
And you know what, I think what we'll do, is, for those who are not going into the breakout rooms, if you could use the chat to submit any questions that you have. What I'll do is I'll look at those questions rather than go into a breakout room, and I'll try to address some of them when we come back in about 8 minutes. I hope that worked.
I think so. I see notes in the Google Doc. So
yes, the only one that didn't have notes was the one I was scribed for. So I feel like we should go first, maybe. So I believe it's Rosa Nicole is going to report on our group, which was discussing the art of being an ally as a coach.
Okay, great. Well, do y'all want to go first? You do want to go first? Which that was room, I think.
We were the fifth group, so we were 5.
Okay, great. Welcome back, everyone. So Jonas, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay. Well, let's just dive straight into it. So I just asked that people kind of report the gist of what you were talking about, and then we can maybe have some discussion around it and answer any questions that we have. So I was actually supposed to be writing things down in Rosa Nicole's group, but we were talking about the art of allyship in the coaching field and some of the challenges that we may have. So take it away, Coach.
All right, so I'm going off of memory, so bear with me. We kind of mentioned definitely just kind of leveling with, whatever sport you are, and making sure that you communicate with the child so you understand, like, does everyone know? Does no one know? Because you don't want to out them accidentally. And also doing things such as asking the entire group, like, pronouns and stuff like that, and making sure everybody is calling each other the correct pronouns. And just making sure that they understand, what you're there to do and how you can help them, and also asking what they need from you in that aspect if they need anything. I kind of forgot everything else.
That's okay. Yeah, and being humble when you make a mistake. We were talking about, it's okay to make mistakes and then be corrected. Even if on the first day of preseason, I say to my whole group, I'm like, hi, this is our one governing principle is respect and accountability, right? So we treat everyone with the same amount of respect, and then when we make a mistake, we hold ourselves accountable for that. And then sometimes you as a coach might even make a mistake. I have colleagues who are actually openly gay coaches who still can sometimes use the wrong terminology and then have had to apologize for that. So, and there may be different reasons, like they just didn't have the same access to education. So, this is one circumstance. I know you've all heard the art of being humble as a coach. This is one circumstance where it's really important, like acknowledge when you make mistakes, educate yourself, and then educate the group, right? Because it's very easy to start your season saying, hey, if anyone, uses different pronouns, mine are he, him, his, let me know. And also let me know if we can share that publicly, like if it's okay to share that publicly. And if it's not, then that's also okay. So that's where we got with our allyship. Win, what does group 1 have for a topic?
Great. So group 1 is you hear a player in your locker room say, quote, "That's so gay," about another player's new shoes. Do you intervene, and how? What if the response is, "I didn't mean anything by it"? So we'll let group 1, who was Addie, Danielle, Jacqueline, and Marvelous.
Yeah, I will be our spokesperson. So we thought all along the same lines, like we certainly intervened. And I think the biggest thing we talked about was like taking it as a teaching moment. Marvelous weighed in and said, sometimes these like young kids especially don't necessarily know what things mean. So he suggested, flip it around and say, what did you mean by that? Or do you even know what being gay means? And use it as an opportunity and sort of intervene in that way. We also talked a lot about context, you know, even if those two people are best friends and they have this sort of joking relationship, there could be someone else overhearing it who could take offense to that. So it's just understanding, you know, all of the surroundings. And then, you know, it's always, even if you didn't mean anything by it, like it matters no matter what. So again, using that as a teaching moment and say, even if you meant to say like, oh, I hate your shoes, or like, first of all, why are you even saying that? There's no need for it. But second, like, you know, here are some other ways that you could potentially say that without using that word. And then we also kind of talked about, as a coach or an adult figure, maybe understanding that that kid might be struggling with all sorts of things, that maybe some internal homophobia, and their reaction is their way to cope. And so also understanding that, you know, don't yell at this kid for saying this, because they might be going through some things and they're really repressing their own feelings of their own orientation. And so maybe it's coming out in that way. So it's just kind of like understanding all these different things. It's, I think, everything that we got down. So jump in, team, if I missed anything.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. Because, you know, it's interesting because, you know, I think everyone, you know, who's here today would probably has their own like internal impression of what hearing a homophobic slur, for example, is like and what it means to them. But, you know, as you alluded to, it might be that person themselves who used the slur struggling with their own identity. And so if you overreact with anger, you know, that's one of those situations where you probably have to check your own personal opinions about it at the door, and maybe, you know, come to the conclusion about, you know, what that means to that person. I love, I believe it was Marvelous who said, you know, turn that around and say, what does that mean? It's really important. I work with an all women's soccer club in Brazil, and very, very inclusive, very, you know, a lot of members of the club are, you know, members of the LGBTQ community, but they call each other a horrible homophobic slur. And I had to ask them why they do that and what they think the impression it gives of other people about how acceptable it is to use that slur. So definitely addressing those situations can be important, and you have to be careful about how you navigate that, because for some people, they believe it is their right to call each other that because they've gone through that struggle, right? And so you have to get to a sort of comfortable medium for people to express. How about group 2?
Great. So group 2, the situation is you want players to invite their families to the game this weekend. What are several ways to communicate this to your players using inclusive language? And so group 2 is Ed, Owen, Jack, and Sawan, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, I took notes. Sawan, feel free to jump in because you provided a ton of great context if you'd like. But I think one thing that came up was that the definition of family matters. So Sawan described his team as a group or a family. So he said if he were to use the term family, it would be inclusive. It wouldn't be like a nuclear family, but it would be a broad group of supporters, or like your support network. So by defining his team as a family, he's already like changed the definition or what it means traditionally. So when he was inviting his team to invite more players or more supporters to the game, it was like a broad network of supporters. I think another thing, so the first was defining what a family is, so who can be included. And then another thing was just broadening the scope to make sure it includes like close friends, supporters, guardians, whoever that may be. And then I think one thing we were kind of touched on, but we didn't get written down, but I think is important to make sure it's like optional, or like that it's like not everyone's going to have the opportunity to have someone support them. So making sure that that's okay too, and that you're understand, like it's not looked down upon if people don't come. It's just like we would encourage you to support so we can have a better turnout or whatever. But we understand that, especially if it was like this weekend, we understand that there's a lot going on and not everyone's going to be able to make it. So that's totally fine.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And it's, you know, traditional traditional language around inviting family would be, as you all know, please invite mom and dad to the game. And that's language we just have to basically put behind us, because, obviously, in every team, there's going to be the possibility of, even the parents working, right, and not being able to come, whether it's a mom and dad or mom and mom, right? There's questions around family that extend beyond the traditional roles. I grew up in a single mother household. My mother saw one game of my entire athletic career. So, and that just came down to work schedules, and I had different types of family support. So if you asked, me, and I'm using this subjective experience, if you asked me what my family was, it was my friend's mom who drove us everywhere, right? And so, that was my support network. And so a support network is great. Having it optional, fantastic, right? And even, at some point, if they're old enough, they might say, why do you never say mom and dad? And then you might be able to have that conversation. If you ever have the opportunity to have that conversation with your team, if they're old enough to be curious, stop practice and have that for 2 minutes. Because that can actually be more impactful than what you might even be working on that day, and they'll appreciate you for it. So the other one that we all struggle with, guys. Hey guys, invite your family. Such a difficult word to get rid of if you are like me and you heard that word your whole life, and getting rid of that word. I've basically just started saying y'all, and I'm from New York, right? And so like y'all is not naturally in my vocabulary from a geographical perspective, but y'all is arguably one of the most inclusive words we have in American English. And, if y'all want to bring someone to the game this weekend, please do. Done. All right. Thank you so much. Those were great. Do we have someone from group 3?
Jonas, I had a question to pose to the group related to everything we've talked about. Is there something to be said about an intersection between sort of culture, like social class or race or something like that, in how LGBTQ inclusivity looks like? Can it look different culturally from, from between different races, et cetera? Or does that make sense? I'm not sure if I tried to write it down, but I couldn't make it clear.
Well, and look, I'll take an example from the soccer community, right? The first team I ever coached was 70% Ecuadorian and Colombian, about 20% Black, and then there was literally 1 or 2 white kids on it. And the understanding, certainly from those who use different language and then translate that from Spanish to English, presented challenges, right? Because there are words that are normalized as terms of endearment that are actually homophobic slurs if you translate them. So you do have that challenge of language. You have the challenge of, there are, brilliant people in your group who might also, be from a certain religious background that, has different attitudes towards the LGBTQ community. And there are obviously different sectors of the world, whether they're US based or not, that actually struggles with any form of LGBTQ identity, right? And, we've seen that in popular culture, and we've seen how different people can, overcome the struggle of it. If any of you have seen the Netflix show, Sex Education, there's a family there that is very religious, from the Black community, and, their approach to the way they're supporting their openly gay son, even in church, is absolutely brilliant. But you have to be able to consider all those things, and then, check your own opinions at the door, right? And that can be really hard, especially as we are currently in a political climate that is extremely divisive. It can be really difficult to check your own self at the door. But, we want to be conscious of the fact that, for example, our work in Mexico is being confronted by basically routine right? And cultural practice. That is our culture. What we yell at a goalkeeper when they're taking a goal kick is part of our soccer culture. How can you take that away from us? Like that's part of what we do, right? And you have to be able to provide solutions and alternatives. And you also have to be willing, to accept the fact that it's not going to be easy for every one of your parents to be on board with using inclusive language. But within your family, your team, you set the ground rules, and as long as they're the same for everybody else, that culture of respect and accountability will go a lot further.
Thank you. Did anyone else maybe have some thoughts about that? About maybe difference in what inclusivity looks like according to cultural differences, et cetera?
Yeah, I'd love to hear if anyone has any challenges, like with literal examples. When I'm working with Latinx players, the use of the P word is a big challenge right now. I grew up playing with Colombian and Ecuadorian guys who would call each other the P word as a term of endearment. So, I'd love to hear if anyone else has some similar examples of cultural challenges that might lead to, challenges to your inclusive network within the team. No? All right, let's move on to the next, maybe sharing room.
Yeah, no worries. We'll hop on into group 4. For group 4, discuss the meaning of impact versus intent when it comes to the language we use in locker rooms or in practices/games. Group 4 is Danielle, Joe, Kian, and Kim.
Well, I can take it. We talked a lot about the words that you've just heard your whole life. So I talked about been taking 2 years to get guys out of my vocabulary because it's just been pounded into my brain my whole life. But we also talked about using to not use and to use y'all in that situation is what I've been doing also. But to not use girls as a term for your team if it's all female, because that's not necessarily the term that they want, especially as they get older, and that we needed to step back and ask what they want to be called as a group too, and what like to be on board with the terminology, and let the team lead with the terminology that they want to use. And then we spoke a little bit about how instruction in a sport it's about instruction in the sport, and so being intentional about just not using gender-based instruction terms, because at least in my sport with rowing, it's learning how to row the teaching is not different based on gender.
And maybe a follow-up question, at what point do you stop using, like, let's say you coach young women, at what point is it okay to make that transition from using the term girls to something else? Even ladies, yeah. 5 years ago, we were using the term ladies, and we're trying to move away from that because it has a bit of a diminutive form to it. The English Women's Soccer League used to call their teams ladies. Now everyone's moving away from that. So the times they are changing. But at what point is it appropriate to say, "Hey everyone" versus "Hey girls," or should you just do that from the beginning?
When we were discussing it, I was talking more along the lines that for my team, understanding my team and knowing how they identify, I do use ladies for the older players, because I know how they identify. Or I have always been against more of using girls. I don't like using or calling them girls. However, when we would play against other teams, I would then I would not assume gender and use they, them as I was talking about the other team. However, yeah, there's a transition between calling them a squad and calling them a team and seeing what is comfortable for me as reflecting with my team.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and that's a challenging one because you can't figure that out if you have a brand new group every year, right? If you have a high school team, let's say, or if you have a high school age team, or you just get a new team every single year. So yes, that can be a challenging one, and you might have to address it every single year. Did we have one other breakout room? Because I know I want to be really conscious of time because it is supposed to be a 1 hour lunch and learn. And I do want to have an opportunity to talk about, where you can go from here, where you can get additional resources and answer any other additional questions. Wynn, did we have another breakout room?
We did. We had one more, and that is breakout room 6. And the scenario is you decide to run a Pride event or participate in a local LGBTQ plus community event, such as a parade, and one of your players or parents says, "Can we keep politics out of sports?" How do you respond? And so, Jarita, Kelsey, and Nolu.
Yeah, so I think we talked a lot about first, like framing it of like, what makes you think this is political? Like kind of creating this like safe space for people to learn about LGBTQ plus like in sports and like how it's not political, and like just kind of talking about like society has constructed this for you to like think that it's political. So just kind of like challenging prompting questions to kind of maybe break down that thought, and then also like feel free to have your child opt out, and like sort of creating just like a space.
Yeah, I think and the most important response is, this is not a political issue. This is a team issue. This is a human issue, right? I would say outside of the sports space, like this is not a political issue. This is a human issue, right? This is basic human rights, but within a team, it's very easy to to say to different people like, we want to support the LGBTQ community the way we want to support the Latinx community, right? The way we want to support if we have any indigenous players on the team, right? And that's there are different ways of certainly addressing that. And, your action of even having a Pride game or a Pride fundraiser or some sort of virtual event is very demonstrative, even if you don't know in particular that you actually have an LGBTQ athlete. So Wynn, remind me, do we have just one single hour, or do we have like a few extra minutes here? I don't want to keep people too long.
We do. We actually, we are scheduled until 15 past the hour.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't remember that. Yep. Yeah, you'll have to forgive me. This is what I do on an almost daily basis. So, kind of where, and I thank everyone for sharing, thinking about the possibilities of being creative with gender neutral. I want to talk a little bit about maybe where we go from here. One of the things that might be in your sort of hot topic discussion points, whether you're a youth coach or not, is about gender, right? Does your league actually have a policy for gender inclusion? There are youth leagues currently who are discussing, removing the concept of gender and just using, inclusive forms that really don't identify gender up until a certain age, right? So let's say in terms of safety, right? If all things considered equal, up until the age of about 12 or 13, it is actually possible for everyone to play together, right? Now, that might be a concept from a different planet where you are. That, people might say, under 5 boys and under 5 girls. I've never heard anything else, and I don't want to hear anything else, right? And so maybe that's not your fight as a coach, but does your league at least have certain policies for for inclusion. It doesn't have to specifically be named, LGBTQ inclusion, right? It can be, do they have a policy for, to deal with discrimination? Do they have a policy for reporting safety issues? Do they have a policy for any sort of racist language, homophobic language, sexist language? Those are things that you can influence just by asking the question, right? And if they don't, there are places that, you can borrow from. There are different leagues. There is a league, which actually was supposed to start this year in Oregon, where they removed gender completely from registration, and the entire league is playing without, gendered forms, for example, and gendered registration. So, it is starting to change, and that is something new. Now, if I see in the chat, I think someone mentioned something about, how to manage the situation if, one of your players has maybe, alluded to the fact that they, based on their gender preferences or identity or expression, that, they don't want to change in the locker room. At levels like the NCAA and even in many high school sporting organizations now, even the away facility does have to be able to provide that. And if they don't, then, we have to get creative, right? Sometimes at the grassroots level, we're not dealing with a locker room. We're like changing in a bathroom that has 2 stalls, and that the whole team has to be in there. That's a little more inclusive than we actually want. But if there's a player on your team who would prefer to get changed alone, coming up with creative solutions by even asking, the host, do you have a washroom that I could use as a coach? And if that washroom is available to you as a coach, can you bring that athlete who prefers to change on their own and let them use it first, right? And so just getting creative with limited resources, something I learned as a 15-year NCAA soccer coach, actually, because we don't ever have any money, can actually be really important. Have a plan. And if that player doesn't want the rest of the team to really be involved in that plan, make sure that you're able to do that discreetly. But what you can do, certainly from a governance perspective, is to, ask the league, like, what are our policies? And if you don't have one, simply asking that question can be really important. Some of you may or may not be navigating that at all. Obviously, some of you have different levels of coaching, but where can you go to get the resources that you need? Obviously, I've talked about the You Can Play website. That's a great starting point. If you want to be more active, obviously send us an email to talk about, maybe some gestures that you can do. If you're a soccer team right now, like there's the United Soccer Coaches, which is one of the largest coaching organizations in the world. And it's kind of the alternative to the USSF in the United States in terms of coaching education. They're still doing a virtual program called Playing with Pride this fall. And you can actually do a virtual demonstration of how, your team is LGBTQ inclusive. In terms of other resources, vocabulary is a huge one. And, learning pronouns. We have a pronoun sheet if you want to check it out right on our resource section. But there's also some different materials out there from different organizations that exist that aren't sports specific, right? You Can Play as a sports specific organization. So we work with sports people, we work with coaches, we work with organizations who might need some help in developing their own policies. And so if you need that, by all means, reach out to us. But there's also, really great resources in terms of media vocabulary. If you're not sure what vocabulary to use in your social media, and that's actually another thing I wanted to talk about because of the importance of social media to all your youth players. There are guidelines from organizations like GLAAD, GLAAD, which actually put out a media guide for what to use, what people used to use, and what you shouldn't use. And because they're not a sports specific organization, they are trying to churn that information out on a regular basis. So like that's another resource. And we actually have links to different organizations that, might even be considered competitors to us, but that's because the resources are really good. One of the areas that you might find a little bit challenging is finding Spanish language resources. There is some that have been developed by the HRC, which again is a non-sport specific organization, Recursos en Español. They're there, but it's in a very developmental phase, and we're going to try to put out some Spanish language resources that are specific to sport in the coming months, using bilingual members of our team here. Let's talk about social media, because all of your players are probably on social media. They might not do more than read posts or repost things themselves, but they're probably there. Do you have to have the talk about how your inclusive values should extend to your players' social media behavior? Question for the group. Do you think that matters? Is that your role as the coach? And how does a player's social media behavior possibly impact your team environment? Genuine question. Anyone?
Well, I feel like if players follow each other on social media, which they probably do, the language you use on your social media probably the intent and impact question is probably there as well. Like, they could see things and then maybe think that person doesn't like them for X, Y, or Z reason because of the language they're using on social media. So I think it's a tricky place to be, but just also speaking about when you're using language or the intent behind language, how it's just not happening in person, but all the other ways that you communicate in your life.
Yeah, that's good. And, especially your point about them using social media to communicate. And so, in your team policy, you're not governing their behavior on social media, but you might want to, mention the impact that it has on the team, especially in a public space, right? For those who have public Instagram accounts, for those who have, Twitter is very public. I know people don't use that if they're under 30 anymore, but some people do. Sports people in general still are hyper-focused on Twitter and its importance. There's a certain U.S. president that uses it a lot. So you want to be mindful of those situations, because even when somebody thinks something is private, it's not. And I have had to deal with situations where, high school coaches who are the most inclusive people in the world have children that go on Instagram and say homophobic things, not realizing how public it can be and how much that can impact your team environment when somebody, and I'm not even talking about bullying, which is a whole different level. I'm talking about the language and how important words are and how much they matter, even in that environment. So have a social media policy as a coach, and it doesn't have to be intrusive. It's not your job to govern, especially young people's social media behavior, but just let them know, like, social media is public. Even when your settings are set to private, there's always someone who can screenshot, and if that gets back to the team and impacts the team, there could be consequences, and that's really important for you to say, and that's as far as it has to go. And that's a conversation that, believe it or not, I have to have with the college age players who probably mess that up the most, not realizing, like, hey, my Instagram was private, like, and this person got a screenshot of it and then shared it with everyone, and then all of a sudden you're in the middle of not just a team battle, but a scandal as well. With the remaining 5 minutes, I just wanted to see if there were any additional questions. Did anyone have anyone they wanted to bring to the group, and either in the group chat or verbally ask one final question, if we can squeeze it in here? I am going to put my email into the chat here. It was in the presentation as well, but you're all coaches, right? You are part of the You Can Play family if you choose to be here. So if you come up with questions or concerns, or even, you get involved in a situation where, you might need a little extra guidance, or you might want to ask a little bit more about certain resources, beyond what we have on the website, by all means, reach out. The most important thing that I hope you take away today is that, the simple concepts of respect and accountability in a locker room are easy to follow, even if you're not an expert, right? Respect is a universal rule. I've worked with college res halls that have 1,000 people in, and they have one rule in their rule book: respect, because it's so broad reaching. It actually catches people in really difficult ways. But respect and accountability in a locker room, in providing that inclusive locker room environment, is all you really need to know. And holding yourself accountable when you don't know is part of that level of accountability. So this is one of those few scenarios where you might know all the X's and O's of your sport. You might know physical preparation and everything else, but I can't say enough that, taking a humble approach to inclusion as a journey is really important. One that I myself as a coach am still on. Want to thank your organization for making us a part of this Lunch and Learn series. What we do using the power of pro athletes, especially, or Olympic athletes, is really great. But this group of people, this group of coaches, working with youth groups across the country, is probably the most impactful. And what you do as the gatekeepers to that next generation of either allies or people who feel comfortable, being their own true self, is way more important than any NFL, NHL, NBA, MLS star being a good ally. So thank you so much for being here today, for doing what you do. And let's carry on the conversation. If you want to carry this on and talk a little bit about what's happening in your world, by all means, send me a note. I'm moving my apartment this week, but I'm happy to have that conversation with you as soon as this weekend. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonas, for facilitating such a great conversation and session in the midst of moving. That's incredibly stressful. So we really do appreciate you for taking the time to do this with us. We all know that this is an incredibly important topic and needs to be centered in our work. So it's a work in progress, but toward that is incredibly important. And so I appreciate everyone joining today's Lunch and Learn. Second, I'd like to invite everyone for our next Lunch and Learn. That will be happening in October, on October 21st. We'll be joined by Dr. Taranika Powell from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. And we'll be talking about a really cool topic. We'll get a little more abstract, a little more theoretical, talking about theory of behavioral change in thinking about sports and programs, etc. So look out for that invite. And also we're continuing to schedule future sessions. So we know that there's a lot of great work being done out there. We'd love to spotlight that work. We'd love to share and learn from your work. And so if you or anyone you know would like to share your work, let me know. Reach out to me. I'll throw my email in the chat. So thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it.